While the AAA industry focused entirely on realism and the future of video games, certain indie developers were turning their focus to their childhoods. For years, indie developers have attempted to recreate the magic of the arcade experience, from shoot-'em-ups to pinball machines to 2D platformers. This nostalgic trend mostly occurred on flash sites like Newgrounds and Armour Games, but in more recent years they have made a return to mainstream gaming, and the game we're looking at today is one such game that has made its way from just a passionate developer's website to all major gaming platforms, and that game is Cursed Castilla. Cursed Castilla is a 2D platforming action game developed by Loco Malito and published by Avi Light Studios, with the soundtrack composed by Grisor87, the same crew that made the game I previously covered, called Super Hydora. It released on Steam October 20th, 2016. It later released on other platforms such as Xbox One, PS4 and PS Vita. Originally the game was called Maldita Castilla EX, which translates to Cursed Castilla, but was later renamed Cursed Castilla. With its name change came an expanded game with new levels, enemies and an extended plot. Cursed Castilla is easily one of the greatest influenced and reimagined games of those from the arcade days. It is a game that is created by a developer who understands the nature of arcade games and their gameplay, creating a game that few ever could. Cursed Castilla takes place around the year 1081. After a great war, a woman by the name of Mora is heard grieving for her lost love. A demon uses her tears to create a magical key, opening a portal to the kingdom of Castilla, where it comes overrun by monsters. You take on the role of Don Ramiro, one of 4 knights summoned by King Alfonso VI of Leon to put an end to the demon's reign of terror. During the journey, Ramiro must find all 5 of Mora's tears hidden throughout the lands. Only then will he be able to open the portal to the demon's realm and defeat him, putting an end to the demonic invasion. There are a number of different endings to the game depending on how well you do throughout. For example, in order to get the true ending, you will need to find all 5 of Mora's tears. Without them, you won't be able to open the portal to the final boss. How many continues you use throughout the game also affects the ending. After using 4 continues, you're warned that if you keep using them, it will come at the cost of your soul. So what ending you get depends entirely on how well you play and if you find all of the tears that are scattered throughout the levels. This gives the game massive replayability, making the game well worth its price tag alone. Along with that, the actual plot to the game is inspired from a 16th century Spanish chivalric novel called Amadis of Gaul. The entire plot, along with many other elements of the game, such as enemies, come from Spanish and European folklore. This gives the game and its plot a sense of uniqueness despite its similarities to Ghosts N Goblins. While basic, the plot is great and one that is slightly different from that of any other title of its kind. The gameplay to Cursed Castilla is identical to that of Ghosts N Goblins. You must make your way through a series of levels from a 2D side-scrolling perspective, both through combat and platforming. As you progress through the levels, a variety of enemies will attack you, each with their own unique behaviours and attack patterns. You will also find chests offering an assortment of bonuses for you to collect. Some are various treasures that increase your overall score, while others contain new weapons such as a default sword, throwing axe, bolas and sickle, each having their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, the hand axe can only be thrown at an arch, making it hard to hit enemies directly in front of you, but it is extremely powerful. The sickle can only be thrown in a straight line and has a limited range, but can attack several enemies at once, and so on. Certain weapons are most effective against different enemies than others, making picking up the right weapon at the right time often crucial, adding a light element of strategy to the game. This is done by waiting before picking up a weapon, as it changes every couple of seconds. Along with the weapons, there is also a variety of power-ups to pick up, such as the blue flower that grants you a fairy that lobs orbs damaging enemies, a shield that grants you a free hit, and winged boots that enable you to double jump. These power-ups, much like the weapons, are extremely useful and help you in your quest, but unlike the weapons, they are fixed as to when it is possible to receive them, but they do come as a welcoming help. You have a total of 3 hit points per life, with 3 lives in total. You can pick up food to restore 1 hit point, and if you pick up a crown you receive an extra life. When you die you lose any power-ups you had along with the weapon you were carrying, if any, and start off again with the default sword. Whenever you die you start off from the beginning of the last screen transition you made. If fighting a boss, you start the boss battle from the beginning. Having this rewards you for playing well, as keeping your weapon means you have more firepower. But even with that said, having only the default sword isn't too much of a disadvantage. It isn't so weak that it puts you at an unfair disadvantage, making the game difficult, but certainly fair. After every couple of levels you are granted a bonus stage, where you have to hit flute-playing crickets who drop treasures for bonus points, and if you kill enough of them, an additional life. These levels are a very welcoming bonus for those looking to get a no continue run or a high score. There is a high score board in Cursed Castilla like many games of this style. The challenging thing about getting a high score is that you lose your points as soon as you use a continue. So if you want to break the high score record, you need to play well. Something that takes time, patience, and practice. The final thing to talk about in relation to the gameplay would be Mora's tiers. As previously mentioned, these are scattered around a number of levels with 5 in total to collect in order to get the true ending of the game and face off against the final boss. These tiers are usually either well guarded or tricky to find. Often they are hidden behind a door requiring a key to open it, with plenty of traps or enemies to stop you in your tracks of getting the key and making your way to the door. But having the tiers means that if you want the true ending and want to experience the game in its entirety, you need to take the more difficult paths, as it is there that the tiers reside. You can't just look down a dangerous path and say nope and go the other way, avoiding some of the trickier parts of the game. Overall, there isn't really anything to complain about when it comes to the gameplay. It uses a successful format and doesn't attempt to do anything new with it, but rather reproduce it masterfully. And that is exactly what the game of Cursed Castilla is. A masterful recreation of the games like Ghosts N Goblins, but with a bit of the developer's own personality put into it. It's also that personal twist to the game that stops it from becoming stale, and giving the feeling that you've been here and done that. It gives Cursed Castilla a personality and identity of its own, making the gameplay feel fresh and enjoyable. If there's one single thing that needs to be done well above all else in a 2D platformer, it has to be the level design. If you don't get that right, your game becomes either boring or imbalanced. Thankfully, Loco Malito has done a great job with the level design of Cursed Castilla. Each and every level is a complete different location with its own theme, atmosphere, threats and enemies. On your journey you will travel through a monster-infested village, a castle, a swamp, a dark cave where your only light is a winged creature with a torch, and even getting attacked by winged creatures while travelling on the road with horse and cart. Every new level is completely different from any of the last, and it is this that makes the journey so enjoyable. You never know what kind of environment you're going to be in next, or what monstrosities those environments are going to bring with them. The levels are well balanced in difficulty for the most part. There are a couple of occasions where things are a bit more difficult than they should be. One being where you're climbing up a tower and your face is in the wall shooting orbs at you. It gets a bit chaotic as you get near the top, and there is one instance in the swamp that I found was also a little bit too difficult, where you need to jump from turtle to turtle while avoiding the spiked orbs in mid-air. From time to time an enemy would appear and head towards you, and with your weapons not being able to get past the orbs, it makes it hard to hit the enemy. And if you get hit, you will fall into the swamp, resulting in instant death. It is a case of patience, timing and learning the pattern of the turtles and enemies, but it can be extremely frustrating, especially when it is only halfway point in the game. But with those difficult moments said, the game does an incredible job of subtly telling the player of the dangers ahead. While most modern games would stop the gameplay for a character to tell you to watch out for those spikes, or that fluid is dangerous, Cursed Castilla shows the danger before it becomes a threat to the player. For example, in the first level you come across several birds feeding on a corpse. They simply fly off without being a threat to you, but it comes as a warning to watch out for them on the road ahead. Or in the swamp, there are spiked orbs that fall from above, doing this before it is possible for them to actually be a problem to you. It gives you the warning signs without directly telling you each and every time, and that is just sheer level design brilliance. Every little detail of each level is brilliance. Sure, there are some few moments that are a bit too difficult, but they are so far and few between that once you get through them, they are quickly forgotten about. No level feels like you've been there before, and each have their own unique charm and atmosphere, making them all a sheer joy to play. The enemies of Cursed Castilla are very well designed and each unique with their own behaviour and attack patterns. Some fly attacking you directly, while other flying creatures will drop explosives from above or shoot projectiles at you. Some enemies will charge towards you, while others will attack from a distance, such as archers or knights with throwing knives. Some are instantly identifiable with the Ghosts N Goblins, such as the zombies and the birds, but most of the enemies are unique. like the setting and plot of the game. Most of them come from inspiration of European history and folklore, especially that of Spain. While I'm no historian or expert on European folklore, there are definitely some enemies throughout the game that jog the memory of familiarity in some form or another from various tales and legends that I've heard throughout my life. The bosses in particular are very striking of tales, like the crazed knight in the 3rd level or the giant worm in the 2nd. Those two specifically stood out to me for some reason. But aside from their memory invoking capabilities, they are extremely well designed from an attack perspective. Each boss is very different from the last, offering their own challenging attack patterns and at times unique arenas. While they're difficult, they are not unfair. It's a simple case of watching and adjusting to their attack patterns, most of them being quite predictable if you pay attention. Once you understand how they attack, you shouldn't have too much of a problem with beating them, as long as you keep on your toes and don't lose your focus. So overall, they are well designed, they are challenging, while not being unfair. The only boss I found to be especially difficult was the crazed knight in the 3rd level. He felt a little bit too difficult for the point in the game you face him. He is definitely a major spike in the increase of difficulty compared to the rest of the game up until that point. So much so that the bosses after him are actually quite easy in comparison. But aside from that, the enemies are all enjoyable foes, and even the crazed knight himself is a joy to face despite being a bit too difficult for the point he arrives. Bosses and normal enemies alike offer new challenges throughout the entire game, helping with keeping the experience from becoming stale as you progress. Then there's the soundtrack of the game, which is composed by Grisor87, who does an absolute stand up and applaud job with the music for Cursed Castilla. Not only is each and every track fitting, it creates the perfect atmosphere for all the levels. At the start of the game, the music has somewhat an upbeat heroic tone, but as you get closer to the end, things begin to get a bit darker, and so too does the music. It makes you feel like you're getting closer to evil, which of course you are as you progress. This is especially apparent in the swamp, as the music takes a slightly slower and darker tone to the previous levels. It brings a sense of sadness to the level as to what was probably once a colourful place that has been turned into a land of monstrous swamp creatures and mutant plants and trees. Each and every track really brings out the emotional feeling of the environment it is playing in, and it conjures up the atmosphere brilliant. It is thanks to Grisor's music that the world of Castilla feels so alive, and it brings many emotions with it as you struggle to make your way through the levels. It is nothing but true musical magic that is an absolute joy to hear play through the entire game from start to finish. Covering Cursed Castilla was an optional choice for me to make. It was Super Hydora that I was asked to review, which I did, while Cursed Castilla was there as an additional option to cover if I wished to do so. And I'm actually glad that I did, not just for the fact that it is a great game, but because it has made the problems I mentioned in my review for Super Hydora that much clearer to me. What makes Cursed Castilla so good, while I really hammered Super Hydora at times, is that it is a much more refined experience. Yes, Cursed Castilla has less content, less levels, less enemies, pretty much less everything, but it makes up for it with polish. It is a game that is the perfect example that sometimes less is better, and it is definitely Locomalito's finest work. Sure, Super Hydora is good, but it is a game that tries to do too much and ends up making some serious mistakes because of it. Cursed Castilla is proof that Locomalito is at his best when he is reproducing and reimagining the games of the past, as opposed to attempting to reinvent them entirely. Cursed Castilla is a love letter to the arcade days, to games like Ghosts N Goblins, and Locomalito has done an outstanding job at bringing the experience of the arcade days to those who want to revel in nostalgia, along with a new generation of gamers. The plot is creative and intriguing, the gameplay is simply engaging, the level design is brilliant, the enemies are fear-inducing, difficult, yet fair, and the soundtrack is a sheer pleasure to listen to, while it brings the world of Castilla to life, and the visuals are simply just a perfect representation of the era it inspires from. It is as close to perfection as an arcade experience can get without actually being there and putting money into a machine. There are a few moments where the game is a bit more difficult than it needs to be, but aside from that there is little less to criticise. And with that, I give Cursed Castilla a 9 out of 10. It is a game that anyone who enjoyed the days of arcade games will surely love. And for those who are curious as to what arcade games used to be like, it is the perfect game for your first experience. It is difficult and requires some patience, but if that isn't a problem, then Cursed Castilla will be a joy to play from beginning to end.